public to 530. There have been 335 outbreaks in residential care settings, where a census of all deaths so far this year is now being carried out. HIQA has also been asked to put together a checklist of items for all nursing homes next week to tackle the problem. Health Minister Simon Harris says the watchdog will visit facilities the following week to make sure that the measures are in place.
My main obligation is not to any one individual nursing home or any institution, it's to the people living in them. It's to our Irish people living in those nursing homes, our residents, our friends, our families. So I think the HIQA standards, if you want to call them that, or framework, is a really important development.
Well, the UK death toll from coronavirus has risen by another 888 people. In Northern Ireland, 17 more confirmed to have the virus have also died. It brings the total number of deaths from COVID-19 in the UK to 15,464. The gunman who killed Lyra McKee took more than just one life when he pulled the trigger a year ago. That's the message from the sister of the murdered journalist Nicola Corner. Today marks a year since the 29-year-old was killed during riots in the Cregan area of Derry.
The day they killed our wee Lyra, they destroyed a part of each of us. And what makes it all even worse is that Lyra's murder literally killed our mother on the 10th of March. You know, she just could not live without her baby. She just couldn't accept that Lyra had been killed.
Global stars will join forces tonight from their homes around the world in a concert for healthcare workers on the front line of the COVID-19 pandemic. One World, Together at Home will feature performances by the Rolling Stones, Paul McCartney and Lady Gaga, who curated the concert. It's set to air live online and on TV and radio stations worldwide from 7 p.m. Irish time. Michael Sheldrick from the Global Citizen Movement, which organised the show, says it's not just about music.
We don't have the ability, of course, to bring 60,000 people together in Central Park. We've been working with Cisco and our other technology partners in order to ensure we can reach millions of people. But also importantly, we're providing a way for people to take action. And so people can sign up, they can take quizzes, they can educate themselves, and they can also learn about the various ways they can support health workers.
That's your news update. It's just gone 2 minutes past 3.
News Talk weather.
Thanks to the AA. Need to renew your AA home insurance? Go to the aa.ie/myAA.
Tonight will be cloudy, mild and misty with patchy rain, drizzle and fog. However, it will be colder and mainly dry over northern Ulster with some clear spells. Lows of between 3 and 8 degrees. And now you're up to date on News Talk.
Football on Off the Ball.
With Paddy Power, the greatest football partnership since Duff and Heskey.
And you're very welcome back to Off the Ball Saturday on News Talk. John Duggan with you through to 5 o'clock in the company of the Irish Independent football correspondent Daniel McDonnell and the broadcaster and journalist Johnny Ward. 53106 for your text messages. Remember, our football coverage brought to you thanks to Paddy Power. For more information on responsible gambling, visit dunlewy.net. So we're streaming live as well now. You can get in touch with us on the Off the Ball social channels, YouTube, Facebook and Twitter. At Off the Ball is our handle if you want to get in touch on Twitter. With no live football, obviously, for the foreseeable future. So every Saturday 3, we've been taking a World Cup year, bit of escapism in these serious times and having a bit of fun with this, reflecting on the year, our memories of it, if we're alive and if we're not alive, like today, 1966 for some of us, talking about it. We're watching the Amazon Prime official film. And this week's year is when the year of football came home, hosted in England, won by England. 54 years of hurt, though, lads, since then. And I got to say, I watched the movie Goal. I think it's the best movie I've seen so far. Almost this kind of fly-in-the-wall, psychedelic, swinging 60s vibe. And we're going to have Brian Kerr, who was at the final, to talk about it after 4. But, lads, what did you make of it?
I enjoyed it, John. Yeah, I mean, it's it's a fascinating tournament. We'll probably pick through parts of it. Probably a more controversial tournament than we perhaps realised growing up, maybe hearing about, say, defeats of that England team in 1966. And naturally, we're so influenced by English culture. And, even you think of 1996, you think 30 years of hurt. And you almost, England won the World Cup. That was a given. That was something that happened, but maybe not necessarily realising beyond the obvious of the Geoff Hurst goal, but even just the overall staging of the event and the hosting and some of the decisions, how controversial and probably unpopular winners they were with large parts of the world, including particularly, I suppose, South America, Latin America, And actually, in some respects, you can argue that a lot of the things that happened around that tournament in 1966 maybe contributed to the changes in FIFA down the line and the changes in the World Cup. And again, like a lot of these tournaments that we go through, it almost seems like something that happened in a particular tournament preceded, a very dramatic change in the game somewhere down the line. And England 66 is no different. But to go back to the movie itself, yeah, I mean, I love the introduction. I mean, not everyone who's watching or listening would have actually watched it, but the introduction, maybe compared to some of the other ones which are more artistic, it was more straightforward, running through the 16 teams nearly, showing them all arriving one by one at the airport or their training camp or wherever it was. And a very, like Brian Glanville, the sort of, a doyen figure in journalism, his style is obviously more different to maybe a Sean Connery or various people who feature later on. It's a very fact-based sort of introduction to what was with North Korea and Brazil and Germany and England and sort of Eusebio's Portugal. And there was a lot of different type of teams, all of which had a fascinating backstory behind them. And I'm sure we'll end up sort of running through some of these.
Yeah, and Johnny, the Republic of Ireland went to play-off at Spain because Syria, the third team in the group, didn't play because it was a African boycott and they were in solidarity with that. But Dunphy and Giles were in the Irish team. Spain had won the European Championship. We beat them at home. We lost away. We went to a play-off in Paris and we got hammered in that. But we suppose we had good players back then. We'd Noel Cantwell, we'd Tony Dunn, we'd decent players.
We did. It was fascinating, really, looking back at that film. The music was kind of like something out of a Hitchcock movie. And as much as 1966 seems an awful long time away, I had to reflect on this morning and say that we were born 16 years later, which really isn't that much. So, like, there feasibly were players in that World Cup squad, one of the squads who was possibly still playing football when I was born. And I was trying to think, was football more like my youth in 66, or was my youth in terms of taking in football more like football is now? And I look back on those games, and there were certain similarities that kind of brought me back to my youth. When I saw before the final, there was a guy attaching pliers to put the cogs on the football boot, and I was just thinking, God, I've actually forgotten that we used to do that as kids as well. Now in the days of modern football boots, back in those days as well, you could obviously pass the ball back to the keeper. I think there were so many aspects to this World Cup. So you look at, like, Pele was playing Eusebio, Beckenbauer, even Bobby Charlton, proper world-class players. And Eusebio, basically a product of a Portuguese colony taking on Brazil, another ex-Portuguese colony, and being an absolute master in that tournament. But I think what struck me most watching it back, and I'd be interested to see what Dan makes of this, was just the levels of cynical fouls in the game at that time. And I know Norman Hunter passed away this week, and he was part of the England squad. He was part of a different era of football, but it was almost accepted that the likes of Pele would absolutely just get kicked out of it in every game. And players would be literally taken side down in cynical challenges and would just get up and get on with it. And that was the way it was. And there was a strange attitude, I suppose, to tackles in those days. There were 5 red cards in the tournament. 4 of them were committed against West Germany, which was fascinating. And that was a really, really good German team, obviously. A Germany that was still, really recovering from the war, which was only 2 decades earlier. North Korea, the story of them and the way people in Middlesbrough literally took them to their hearts. North Korea at that time, the economy was probably just starting to really struggle into the country that it is today. But for much of the North Korea-South Korea divide, North Korea was actually more prosperous. And even in the 60s, it was possibly still more prosperous in South Korea. But very little was known about them. And the people of Middlesbrough, possibly sensing a little bit of kind of, they're from the Northeast, they're a bit different to the rest of England. They really took them to their hearts. And, they went 3-0 up against...
Johnny, don't use up all your answers on the tournament in the first answer, right?
Don't worry. We've plenty of time.
Let's not skip beyond, right, the initial question that John asked about Ireland, because before we get to the World Cup in 1966, we have to get to, like, Ireland's story of not getting there, which is, like, one of the great Irish football scandals in itself. And the qualification for World Cup in 66, and I think, like, we should, like, the North Korean story for getting there is sort of incredible as well, because it was a product of that African boycott, and North Korea ended up in a very unusual playoff situation playing in Cambodia. But The Irish one is, again, like you talk about sliding doors moments and how football history may have changed. Ireland played Spain as John, you mentioned, Serbia dropped out due to the African boycott, which we'll probably discuss at some stage. But Ireland played Spain in 2 games in the qualifying group. Ireland won the home game, Spain won the away game. And naturally, England hosted the tournament. And there was a suggestion that the playoff was going to take place in Highbury or maybe in Wembley. But I think Highbury seems to be an accepted version of the story, that it was angling that way. But the FAI basically did a deal with the Spanish that if the game was played in Paris, which was Spain's preference, the FAI would get to keep the gate receipts and have some of their expenses covered.
With hardly any Irish in the ground.
So the FAI sold out, and there was a lot of Spaniards in Paris at the time. It was a legacy of the Franco era. A lot of Spaniards, sort of a Spanish diaspora, had sort of fled, or they were in Paris, and there was no Irish flags in sight, and a very, very good Irish team, as you mentioned, John, with some really top players who all showed up for that game, because they didn't necessarily, the Tony Dunn and various players would have had pressure from Busby, and this is sometimes stories repeating, 30 years, 40 years down the line. They all showed up for the game, although I think isn't there a story about maybe a couple of players going out into Paris the night before, and Dunphy and Giles not being too impressed, but they lost, and they got the money, but they lost the opportunity. And that in itself, it's viewed as an early insight into maybe the FAI's idea to self-destruct at some description, because you can only imagine what an Irish team in that World Cup might have been like in England. I mean, 66 and 96, we've missed out both in playoff situations, one-off playoff situations, which could have spun a completely different Irish football story if we'd participated in particular in 66.
The other thing about that, Dan, sorry, John, is I spoke to my dad this morning because I knew he'd been in England in the 60s, but I never knew that he actually spent his summers in Ireland. So he came home to Ireland from London, and he was telling me that his recollection of the World Cup final was bringing home the turf and listening on a transistor radio on the bog. And I was kind of thinking, nowadays you could actually watch the game on his phone in the bog and still bring home the turf. But you can just imagine the amount of Irish people in England at that time, mass immigration in the 50s, Ireland's economy obviously stagnant, and what it would have been like to watch an Irish game in 66 over there. And what would it have been like for the Irish at home? Because I presume very few people had TVs in 66, but I may be wrong on that.
Yeah, well, RT was only a few years old. I was doing a bit of digging on this morning. I believe it was on the TV. I know Jimmy McGee went to it. I know it was definitely on the radio. You'd expect the likes of Philip Green were commentating on it. But I think they were playing highlights of some matches. I'd say the final went out. But 53106, anybody out there is old enough. Was this World Cup final on television in Ireland in 1966? Do you remember it? Was it a thing at the time at all? A World Cup in England, just across the water? Was it? Because I know that year was a big year for the Easter Rising celebrations, and Nelson's Pillar was, I think, blown up in 1966.
And
50
another
years
thing
on.
as well, JD, you're asking guests how many of them are old enough. This is a bit like where you're on the bus and you're a little bit wary of asking a fella you think is elderly, like, should you offer him his seat or will he be offended? I was actually, the only person I could ask was my father, because my more elderly football friends, I think they might have taken it up a bit wrongly if I asked them if they remembered 66, if you get me.
We want the information from the public out here, because we'll get it from Brian Kerr anyway after 4, because he was at the World Cup final as a young lad in 1966. Yeah, it was just fascinating from an Irish perspective. I think you make a lot of great points there, Dan, about what we missed out on. I suppose maybe just to start off, the World Cup trophy was stolen in March in London, in Westminster, and they never really found who committed the crime. There was a guy called Edward Betchley arrested. He was a middleman, but it was just stolen under the nose of guards at an exhibition, and then it was discovered by a dog called Pickles under the wheel of somebody's car around Crystal Palace by a guy called David Corbett. It's just mad, the history of that trophy, that it was stolen, it was recovered, they had a replica then made, and then it was actually stolen for good in Brazil in 1983 and never found again, and maybe melted down for gold. But yeah, it was a funny start to the whole English hosting of this World Cup in 66. Yeah,
I mean, it is like, I mean, there's obviously sort of a sort of a tragicomic aspect to the whole thing, as you mentioned, like the tournament, the trophy being lost, being recovered by a dog called Pickles, who then a year later, of course, met a rock and roll death of his own as he choked chasing a cat. So it was a...
Doesn't get more rock and roll than that, then.
Yeah, well, no. I mean, you could say he died doing what he loved best, but like this was like. But I mean, there is a sort of a sadder side to it, that the head of the FA at the time, was his name Edwin Mears or Ed Mears or something like that, who actually ended up passing away on the eve of the tournament because he was actually quite unwell, and then had the stress of this, the trophy being lost, which you can only imagine just being an absolute sort of slapstick tale for and an embarrassing tale for the hosts of the tournament. And as you mentioned, you had Pickles the dog finding it, and then the trophy years later basically being lost again, and then presumably melted down for gold somewhere in Brazil. But I suppose England, you think England as the home of football and football coming home and all of this, yet it was the first time that they'd actually, and only time, that they'd hosted the World Cup. And England, the FA at that time was a very English organisation. The chair was Sir Stanley Rouse, who was I think the Sir probably suggests he was sort of a well-respected English gentleman. I think he'd been involved with the London Olympics previously, and he had there was a sort of an old school English value, European values to FIFA. And there was 16 teams participating in the tournament. And part of the origins of the African boycott was to do with South Africa. And we had apartheid South Africa. And I have this brilliant book called Foul. I've sort of, we sometimes, a lot of people are doing stuff with bookcases and pulling out books and stuff that they've got now. I've actually got 3 books here with me today. 2 of them I pulled out a couple of weeks ago, the Garincha one and another one, which would suggest that I own a lot of books, but it might just be the same 3 or 4. But Foul goes into the whole origins of how that was such an influential World Cup, because there was 16 teams in the World Cup. 9 were European. There was only 1 place reserved for African or Asian teams. And then when Stanley Rouse, who basically viewed Mandela with great suspicion because he thought he was maybe a bit of a red, a bit of a socialist, and that the old school values of FIFA didn't want to, if the rule of law had a problem with Mandela, well, then FIFA did. And this was the real old, that was FIFA of that time. And ironically, how they ended up, how it was viewed as this fiefdom, led to 8 years later, Joe Haviland taking over FIFA from Stanley Rouse. Haviland would have been massively critical of the English hosting of the World Cup and some of the refereeing and mistakes that will come to later on. And actually the origins of that was 8 years on. FIFA initially to become more inclusive, and the African and the Asian nations who were felt very ostracised under this regime took it all over, and we ended up with a sort of a very different FIFA, which ended up going from inclusivity to corruption. But that's a tangent. But there was so much scrutiny on the English hosting of it that while it's remembered in English life as a triumph and this is the finest moment in England's sporting history, it actually was very, very differently elsewhere, and maybe explains how England lost its grip over the game to some weird degree. But at the time, as you mentioned, this was a massive deal to have the World Cup in your country, and you had the incident with Pickles and the trophy going missing, and then you also had this diplomatic skirmish. And Johnny mentioned North Korea, and we'll keep coming back to North Korea, where anthems were only played before the first game and the last game in this World Cup. There was no anthems at any other time, and it was to do with the recognition of North Korea, because England was technically still at war with North Korea from the Korean War, and they weren't going to issue visas, and there was a whole sort of schmozzle around that. So the build up to the competition itself, there was all these other issues hanging over it, which were, I guess, a product of the era as much as anything.
Text in here on 53106. I watched the World Cup final in 1966 on RT. First match I ever saw on TV. That's from Dennis in Cork. C. Dinney on Twitter. Wasn't alive for World Cup 66 in England, but my old fella was a young 21-year-old at the Group 1 Mexico-Uruguay game at Wembley. An awful scoreless draw was his recollection. He was more entertained by the Mexico fans around him, screaming Mexico for 90 minutes. Watched it live as a 9-year-old in glorious black and white, I think on BBC TV. Goodison Park game between Liverpool and Everton fans. With Liverpool and Everton fans chanting at each other from either end as a memory. Rory O'Connor Sr. bows until I die. I was just thinking, lads, actually, the stadiums they used Goodison Park for the semi-final, and Brazil played all their matches there. White City, which is gone. Roker Park, which is gone. Ayresome Park, which is gone. Hillsborough, Villa Park, Wembley, Old Trafford. And Johnny, like on the North Koreans, I think it's probably worth getting to. It's fascinating that 7 of them came back in about 2002 to Middlesbrough, and the stadium is now gone. And I just imagine what it was like for these people to go back to North Korea after the way they performed at the World Cup, beating Italy, and then, of course, South Korea beat Italy in 2002.
Absolutely, you know, and North Korea getting to the World Cup subsequently was truly remarkable. And you know, all these stories kind of come out about the players and the lifestyles they live. And I think it was referenced in the film that, was it like they'd spent 2 years in a kind of an army type situation where they did all their training or whatever, and they were probably in really, really good shape physically for the tournament. But in '66, so the Korean War, it's not that far out of the partition of the country. And at that time, North Korea, whilst it was on the way to being obviously a totalitarian state, and is now, you know, basically a prison camp for everyone who lives in it. At that time, it was probably doing pretty well. And when they came back then, and I actually remember watching the documentary on the players who came back to Middlesbrough, and it was really emotional to see the reaction of them and their memories, because it had been so long. But at that stage, you know, North Korea was in the midst of a really, really terrible situation, and under the subsequent leader Kim Jong-il, obviously it was ravaged by famine. And for them to come back to Middlesbrough and a stadium that was no longer there, and you referenced the stadia as well. I remember Roker Park. I remember games there. I remember Ayresome Park, and it's always very sad when these stadia go. And it must have been an unbelievable boon for the Northeast to have those clubs up there. And it just seems very strange that, like, when you look at it now, that Newcastle wasn't obviously chosen. And you mentioned White City as well. White City, I suppose, would be better known for the Dogs, but that's a stadium that I've no recollection of. So it is fascinating when you look back and reflect on these players that have gone, most recently Norman Hunter, and obviously stadia that are gone as well.
The match was on TV. My first time seeing television and soccer. In West Clare, my dad had got a telly with a man on the roof moving an aerial. The house was packed and only one man seemed to know anything about soccer. That is from Brendan. Pak Do-ik, I think was the man who scored that goal for North Korea against Italy at Ayresome Park. The games of our lives, worth checking out, from Daniel Gordon. I remember watching this a few years ago, and I remember when they got into North Korea, this film crew, the people looking at them, they're looking at them like they'd never seen anybody before from a different country, and I found that very, very sad.
In North Korea, John, they're effectively, the people are certainly in the past, you were basically barred from looking at foreigners. It was actually like you couldn't do it. And it's fascinating to see some, like, I'm fascinated by North Korea, and some of the documentaries suggest that the country is actually opening up a little bit. But footballers, you know, you hear of the stories that, let's just say if you were a footballer, you wouldn't want to play badly for North Korea. That would be the general belief.
On an English field, a man from Pyongyang argues with a man from Mozambique. That's what Brian Glanville, who actually did the commentary of that film, said back in 1966. He's still alive. He's the doyen, as you said, Dan, of football writers. I have his book at home. Eusebio was, to me, the star of the whole show in that World Cup when you're looking back. 9 goals, 4 of them penalties, which I think reflects the physical nature, if you describe it as that, of the game back then. He was a European Footballer of the Year, I think. In 1962, he won the European Cup with Lisbon. But even the way he celebrates the goals, there's a childish joy to Eusebio. He's crying after that semi-final, and he really was sadly no longer with us, some player.
There's just the as you mentioned before, because there was no African participation in the tournament, but Eusebio basically was participating because of sort of a colonization, effectively, and that was why he was there. That's why he was so centrally involved. And it's funny, like, as I said, we don't remember this tournament at all. And my dad only told me a couple of years ago, and I was speaking to him again yesterday. He was at the 3rd, 4th place. He was over in England at the time for a summer working. Sort of in his early 20s, and working in some department store in London, but was around during the World Cup. And he went to the 3rd, 4th place playoff at Wembley, which was Eusebio on one side and Lev Yashin on the other for the USSR, which is just like he sees some great stories about that time, queuing up outside the stadium before the 3rd, 4th place final, a sort of row of people just taking autographs off some person. He wasn't even sure who it was. Turned out it was the Germany manager, Helmut Schön, who was just there going to watch the third, fourth place game. So, and I assume there's loads of Irish people, as you mentioned, we've got one or two messages that were spending a lot of time in England around that era who have such stories. But yeah, I didn't realise you'd seen Eusebio play in the flesh, which is just an amazing thing to be able to say. But yeah, the Portugal team almost had that association with Goodison Park and Everton that the North Korean team did with Middlesbrough, where the locals adopted them. And at that tournament, Portugal had seen off Brazil, and Eusebio, I think, until his dying day, basically insisted that if the semi-final of that World Cup had taken place in Goodison Park, which was originally planned until the organisers suddenly decided that England were going to play all of their games at Wembley. There was a belief from the Portuguese side of things that Goodison Park, or I think Eusebio had some other nickname almost for himself. He associated with goodness as Goodison Park. He was at his pomp so much in that competition and so happy in their environment where they were, that they felt if they hadn't been taken out of their stadium, their home ground, to go and play England and theirs, they might have won the thing.
Yeah, do you remember the footage of the 1936 Berlin Olympics is absolutely amazing, and I'd strongly advise looking it up on YouTube. And it was Jesse Owens who took that by storm. And when you think of the World Cup in '66, there were very, very few black players because of obviously the African situation. Eusebio was born in what was then Portuguese Mozambique. But what you were saying, JD, about him, this childlike quality, that's exactly what I thought, because his tears, evoked memories of Gaza, obviously, his tears when they were knocked out. And one of the most kind of reaffirming moments of the footage for me was when he scored against the late Gordon Banks, who again didn't pass away all that long ago, scored a penalty against Banks and went up to get the ball coming out of the goal because Portugal were losing, and pretty much went over to Banks to kind of console him for letting the goal in. It was absolutely beautiful sportsmanship. And I don't know, Dan, what really struck me was, I haven't seen much footage of Eusebio. He had an unbelievably powerful shot. I mean, the ball would have probably been, I don't know what weight it is now, but it was a lot heavier back then. He had unbelievable power in his right foot. And it must have, for fans, young fans in particular, who could see Eusebio on 66 and be at a game, I'd say it was a life-changing experience.
Oh, no, I mean, it really is. And I suppose, Portugal outperformed, obviously with language, and there'd be a lot of links sort of between Portugal and Brazil. And I suppose people would have assumed that it might have been Pele's tournament, or it might have been Brazil's tournament. But Brazil's tournament, you can imagine, I don't know, as you mentioned, John, what was the global television audience for this? In Garincha's book, it explains that in Brazil, all the games were on radio, and it was 2 days later they got highlights packages of it. And I'd assume that was the same in a lot of places. Even the broadcasting experience of the World Cup, for example, all 4 quarterfinals took place at the same time at 3 o'clock on a Saturday, almost like a round of fixtures. So that whole concept of the games being spread out one at a time, like we associate World Cups, it was a completely different thing. So I don't know the extent to which, and if we have Brian Kerr on, the extent to which did Eusebio inspire wonder and awe in the way that other names synonymous with World Cups did in terms of a global audience. But it does seem that Portugal sort of filled that void of the stylish team, that there was a lot of other teams in that tournament who weren't hugely popular because of their playing style, even some of that physicality that Johnny spoke about earlier. And Brazil, who would normally fill that showbiz role, had an absolute nightmare of a tournament. Right back to, the Garincha book, which I mentioned a couple of weeks back, it's the triumph and tragedy of Brazil's footballing hero. Garincha and Pele played their last game ever together in that World Cup. Garincha was sort of coming towards the end, and he had drink issues and a few problems. But it spoke about, again, one of the big controversies was how some of the visiting teams were treated, or felt how they were treated. And it spoke of how the Brazilian team were based 188 miles outside London in some miserable place. There was no TV, no radio. None of them spoke enough English to be able to read the papers. The hotel was depressing. The food was just as bad. The players had heard a rumour that they were being served horse meat. So the majority, as a consequence, opted to eat only potatoes and cabbage. They were unhappy and isolated. It was hardly the ideal atmosphere in which to be preparing for the World Cup. The training ground was an hour from the hotel by train. And like after 3 weeks or 3 months of preparation, they were living through hell. And in the film, we see Pele. There's actually a great shot of like Pele down injured, and it goes silent in the film. And it's like, is it some James Bond music or something starts playing as he's been, the bandages are being applied. So it looks like, Brazil were maybe kicked out at a tournament.
Well, it could have been a Quentin Tarantino movie for some of the tackles on it, to be fair.
Yeah, but it reads like they were kicked out at a tournament when the reality was that their preparation was so miserable that apparently they went to Sweden for a month beforehand, and some journalists who'd gone to watch them there they realised that they were a shadow, an absolute shadow of the team that they were. And Portugal probably filled the traditional void that Brazil would have at a lot of these competitions.
53106. My dad told me earlier that he watched the final age 19 in the American bar in Butlins, sitting beside Bows player Billy Young. He won the equivalent of nearly a month's wages as he put a few bob at England to win the tournament. That is from Nicola in Dublin. Brazil, it's funny, apart from Sweden 58, they don't travel well, though. They don't travel well to Europe and play well in World Cups. You're talking about, funny about the horse meat there. I was in Kazan for the quarterfinal, Brazil and Belgium. I don't know if you were there, Dan. I know you're the England game.
I was, I think. I was in Kazan quite a bit, so yeah.
In Russia. Yeah. And I remember these two Brazilians, were after being beaten by Belgium, going, I never want to see this place again, as they prepare for their massive journey back to South America. Next day, I was eating a steak, and then they had horse in the menu, and I was kind of thinking, this would be an absolute horrific thing for me. And Johnny, I'm sure you're the same, because we both love racing. But I had my steak and I was kind of thinking afterwards, was that steak? 53106 for your text messages. We're going to talk about England after the break. We're talking about England, the 1966 World Cup on Off the Ball Saturday.
Football on Off the Ball.
With Paddy Power, the greatest football partnership since Shearer and Owen.
Screen Time with John Farty.
Adam and Paul, Garage, Viva, just some of the great Irish movies Mark O'Halloran has written and sometimes starred in. And he joins me on this week's Screen Time to talk about his movie and TV life and times. Mark Ryle and I bring you more essential TV and movie and documentary choices you may have missed but can catch up on now during lockdown. And Owen Colgan, aka Buzz from the Hardy Books, tells us about his favourite movie and his new TV show.
Screen Time with John Farty.
With Elephant and Castle.
Listen and subscribe to the podcast now or tune in this evening from 6.
On News Talk.
QuoteDevil.ie can save you money on your car insurance, van insurance or home insurance. QuoteDevil.ie also specialise in car insurance for first-time drivers, young drivers and difficult-to-insure cases.
The Quote Devil's always got one hell of a quote.
Quote Devil Limited is regulated by the Central Bank of Ireland.
Need to get rid of some junk? Clear out the shed or the attic? Or maybe tackle that overgrown garden? Why not pick up a big yellow A1 skip bag from your local Circle K store? With a 10% discount on collections, it's great value. Remember, A1 skip bags are available from your Circle K Dublin, Cork, Waterford and Limerick, except Circle K Express. See a1skipbags.ie.
At Lidl, there's been some changes to ensure the safety of all our customers and staff. But some things haven't changed at all. You can still do your full weekly shop and make great savings on thousands of products. You can still get everything you need to make your family delicious meals all week. And a big thank you to our local suppliers who are still bringing you fresh Irish vegetables and 100% Board B approved beef, lamb and poultry. Even in uncertain times, you can still rely on Lidl for quality, range and incredible savings. Lidl, more for you.
Now more than ever, we know that support matters. That's why we at Permanent TSB are working hard to ensure our customers and colleagues in our communities stay safe in these uncertain times. We've created space in our branches so you can bank safely. But if you prefer to stay at home, you can continue to bank with us in-app or through open24.ie. Talk to our team in branch or visit permanenttsb.ie for updates. Permanent TSB plc is regulated by the Central Bank of Ireland.
Emergency services?
Hi.
What service do you require?
Who are you talking to? Ma'am, how are you?
Get back here!
Fine. No, these restrictions aren't easy.
I said, who are you talking to? Hello? Are you in danger?
Yes.
We're sending help now.
If your home isn't safe, support is still here. Go to stillhere.ie for a list of supports, an initiative of the Government of Ireland with frontline services in your community.
It always feels better to go direct. Sam learned that the hard way when he asked Emily to ask Tom, who knew Alan, who knew Sarah, to ask Emma to the Debs.
Sam who?
Going direct is always the best way to go, especially when it comes to switching to Energia and Ireland's cheapest dual fuel bundle. Come to us directly and you'll get the biggest savings with a 35% discount on gas and a 36% saving in electricity. Visit energia.ie. Energia, the power behind your savings. EAB €1,493 based on average annual usage. 12-month contract, discounted unit rate, standing charge, PSO levy and carbon tax, T's and C's and early termination fee apply. Valid from January 2020 and subject to change. Verification and T's and C's at energia.ie/EAB.
In a matter of weeks, fundraising at Jack and Jill Children's Foundation has been devastated. On behalf of the 340 precious children with highly complex and life-threatening medical conditions under our care, please save Jack and Jill's vital home nursing and end-of-life care. Please text We Care to 50300 to donate €4 or donate online at jackandjill.ie. Thank you. Text cost €4. Jack and Jill will receive a minimum of €3.60. Service provider like charity. Helpline 076 680 5278.
In these uncertain times, we discover the best in each other and in our communities. Your local community pharmacy is working hard in difficult circumstances to supply the medicines you need and the advice you trust. We are asking people to be understanding of small delays and, if possible, phone ahead to make arrangements for collecting your prescription. Your local community pharmacy. Always here for you. Brought to you by the Irish Pharmacy Union.
Football on Off the Ball.
With Paddy Power. The greatest football partnership since Shearer and Owen.
Off the Ball.
World Cup Willie quickly became the symbol of British football followers' hopes that England could give the cup a new home. As the matches drew nearer, the excitement mounted, expressing itself in scores of different ways.
7 more minutes, and Korea score through Paek to Wick to the joy of Paek Sung-yin and the Middlesbrough crowd. The greatest shock in World Cup history.
Eusebio. Oh, my word! Have you ever seen anything like that?
We have still to produce our best, and this best is not possible until we meet the right type of opposition. That is, a team that comes out to play football and not act as animals.
First goes forward, he might make it 3. He has! He has! And that's it!
Welcome back to Off the Ball Saturday on News Talk. John Duggan with you 3 to 5 o'clock in the company of the Irish Independent journalist Daniel McDonnell and broadcaster and journalist Johnny Ward. Richie McCormick's excellent montage there about World Cup 1966, held in England, won by England, 16 teams. We didn't qualify, the Republic of Ireland. Remember, our football coverage brought to you with thanks to Paddy Power. For more information on responsible gambling, visit dunlewy.net. 53106 for your text messages. Also streaming live on our social channels. At Off the Ball is our handle on Twitter, on Facebook, on YouTube. You can listen on the Go Loud app. Lads, let's speak about England. Alf Ramsey was a very good player for Tottenham, and then he managed Ipswich, and he was one of those players who was in the England team beaten by the USA in 1950 in Belo Horizonte in Brazil. But he got the trust of the players, didn't trust the press, but got a really good team flowing, and they really hit the ground running in the tournament. Yeah, I mean, Alf Ramsey's sort of like a fascinating character in a way. Like, did that. He probably at the time of being manager, he probably wasn't a beloved figure, and he would have been. And it's interesting, like that Jack Charlton obviously played for an Alf Ramsey team, and then obviously is so synonymous with our own football story, and probably would have been regarded as someone who viewed people that suited the structure of the team over individuals, and that was very much Alf Ramsey. And there's this book, I referenced it before, Arthur Hopcraft, The Football Man. I got that during the week. Can you believe that? In my lockdown, I ordered about 10 football books, and that was one of them that came through. Well, it's I've mentioned it before, but people haven't heard it. It's a book written in the 1960s, maybe around 1968, 69, by a very respected reporter of the time, or more of a feature writer at the time, who got time to spend
basically to do almost like a series of magazine pieces with the stars of the era, but you're sort of reading them as they were written at the time, as opposed to a retrospective written 30, 40 years later, speaking about their quirks. This is of the moment, of the time. And just speaking about Sir Alf Ramsey, and as he was at that moment in time, that he just was obsessed with the blend of the team. He didn't pick wingers, which was a massive story in England at the time. Like, any references to 4-2-4 or 4-3-3 formations were dismissed as pretentious jargon dropping, or were laughed off as the numbers game. There was almost incredulous pieces about whether he was going to put out a side without wingers, but his whole attitude was he picked the team according to who suited his style of play and who would neutralise opponents. The one exception really was Bobby Charlton, in the sense that Bobby Charlton was that good. He said he just didn't have another Bobby Charlton. He had no one like Bobby Charlton, but there was a sort of a meticulous aspect to the rest of how he picked his squad, that Jeff Hurst was picked as a striker because he had the attributes that suited the role, even though Jimmy Greaves might have been deemed slightly better. Well, I mean, in club football, there's no doubt that he actually was. So, but Ramsey, even at the time, he wasn't necessarily a gregarious figure at all. And Hopcraft describes, at full time, at the end of the game, Ramsey, when they won the final, Ramsey moving abruptly only to stop the England players from exchanging shirts with their opponents. He had to be physically dragged by the players into the groups the photographers were trying to assemble, and the only flamboyant gesture he did was kissing the cup, but that was it. But even after that, in the couple of years, he still got a lot of criticism, a lot of grief, and he was a very serious person, and even the interview doesn't get a huge amount out of him because he had this front, yet he's down in the history books as the only man that did it.
Well, they're not very sentimental over there in England at times. Like, Bobby Moore was not treated well after that World Cup. He ended up very sadly passed away at the age of 52. There was no ambassadorial role for him. He was working on Capital Radio in the early 1990s. And it was a sad end, really, for Bobby Moore. And it's just almost like the World Cup was done, we won it, we're going to revere it forever. But the players themselves, not only in recent years with the medals, for example, that Jimmy Greaves got, he didn't get a medal until about 10 years ago. It's great to see him out of hospital in the last week. But Jimmy Greaves was English football. I think he scored 44 goals in 57 games for England. He got injured against France. And then he's on the bench in that final. There's a photo of it, because I have got this St. Greavesy book from the 80s, because I'm such a nerd. This photo of Jimmy Greaves looking at Jeff Hurst scoring the hat-trick goal, and Alf Ramsey's being congratulated, and Jimmy Greaves is looking askance almost into the ether, and he didn't even get a medal.
Yeah, that was extraordinary. He didn't get a medal till 2009, as you mentioned, and I suppose when I was growing up, he was a pretty big personality on TV over there, and that's how I knew him. But maybe if Scalacci were the kind of unlikely hero of the World Cup we discussed last week, could have been Hurst in '66, because Greaves kind of got, as you said, he got injured early on in the tournament, lost his place, and it must have been very hard for him. I mean, as ridiculous as it is that he didn't get a medal until 2009, the fact that, I found this when I was a kid, when I was younger and I played, if I wasn't picked, I find it hard to support the team. And as much as that's selfish, it was hard, because if you thought you should have been played, maybe your selfishness came out. And I'd say it was a very, very tough final for him, because he wouldn't have expected it to turn out that way. The one thing about the England team that struck me was just how graceful Bobby Charlton looked. And I know Gilesy's been in I suppose he's been in overdrive talking about players from the past over the last couple of weeks, and given his views on these players that would have been before my time. But Bobby Charlton, just left foot, right foot, power again of his strike, and as Dan said, he was kind of allowed to do what he wanted. He was that good. But it is quite remarkable the way it worked out. Jeff Hurst ended up on the dole. He was basically potless after all that happened, and they were very different times. These players were not millionaires.
A text in here on 53106. The 66 World Cup was the real beginning of the love-hate relationship with English football. I'm old enough to remember the talk about Eusebio and Pele and the North Koreans. Very little interest in England winning it, but within a couple of years I was a fervent Liverpool supporter, and so many became Man United, Everton, Spurs fans, etc. The more things change, the more they say the same. That is from Stephen Malahide. I think Stephen have a few things about that. Maybe Match of the Day, maybe football going into colour television, maybe more people in Ireland having access to the BBC and ITV would have been definitely a help, and then Irish players playing in England, and obviously all their relatives they'd have based in England that would have emigrated. In the 1968 European Cup final, Eusebio went 1-1 with Alex Stepney. He hit a bullet, but Stepney managed to get a hold of it. Rather than pout, Eusebio went over to Stepney, shook his hand for making such a good save. They don't make Eusebios anymore. That is from Carl in Cork. Watch the 1966 World Cup matches in Whitesbarn, Margate and Kent for physical education students, girls working there for the summer. Never forget the excitement of the English fans during the build-up to matches and the final. Wonderful summer of 1966. It's our World Cup year of focus. Adam Ball just ran the show in that final against the West Germans, but it was a final that had so much incident, lads. You had Germany equalising effectively in the last minute, and then you had the goal that was it or wasn't, and it was debated for so many years that when Jeff Hurst put it past Tilkovsky who was an injured goalkeeper, I think, in the German goal, and was it over the line? I think looking back on the video, if people haven't seen it, and people have seen it in so many other ways, it was a goal for me.
Well, like, I don't think we're going to solve this debate now.
No, we shouldn't try to either.
Like, if we can solve this in our World Cup Saturdays, then we can. What do we move on to next week? You know, but like it is strange. Like again, we grew up with the story of these English heroes who won '66. But, you know, I think it was Jonathan Bryan who messaged last night to speak that actually how lucky that English team was viewed. Like, France had a player sent off against them. The game against Argentina in the quarter-final set off the rivalry between England and Argentina, you know, in football terms. That was, like, extraordinary that their best player, Raton, was sent off for dissent during the first half of the game. And there's this amazing in the video.
Which pretty much had to decapitate a fella to get sent off. Yeah,
but he got sent off for dissent by a German referee, and there was the South Americans felt that it was a European conspiracy, even though, you know, it's 21 years after the war, you know. But there was this. So England again with 10 men against France, 10 men against Argentina, and they scraped past them 1-0. Then the semi-final against Portugal, which was moved to Wembley. So they had all these hometown decisions to get them there. And then they get this decision in the final. So I guess, you know, it's the decision in the final that lingers. But I think probably for people at the time who were maybe opposed to England, it was actually more of a collection of favourable decisions as opposed to just one. Whereas that one in isolation, yeah, you can probably look at it and think that there's various angles which make it look like that it had crossed the line. But so much went their way in that competition. Like, you talk about how home countries have a bit of fortune, you know, and France '98 and various things can be stacked in their favour. But so much was stacked in the favour of this English team. It's sort of remarkable. But hey, we never heard that when we were growing up, did we?
No, we didn't. 53106 is a brilliant show, a documentary about Bobby Charlton, I think, where Charlton and Beckenbauer were both interviewed many years after the match. It becomes apparent one had been sent out to man mark the other. I always thought it was the thing that said most about Charlton, that he was prepared to be the man marker despite being the team's best player. That is from Aaron. Yeah, Beckenbauer was only 20 in 1966, would captain Germany then 8 years later, would be a World Cup losing manager in 86, and then beat the English in the semi-final of 1990, which we spoke about last week, lads. And it's funny, obviously, we all know about Bobby Charlton, Manchester United legend, Busby Babe, and still a brilliant ambassador today. But his brother Jack on the pitch, and probably the most important person in our football history.
Yeah, and Beckenbauer obviously gone on to feature in the 1990 World Cup episode last week, and Big Jack obviously featured in that as well. Beckenbauer so young, and you can tell. I spoke about the grace of Bobby Charlton, but Beckenbauer had that in absolute spades, and what an athlete he looked even at that stage. And you know, what a name synonymous with football. But Big Jack's legacy with Ireland, I think, there's definitely a thesis in that. You know, what did it do for football in the country? I think it brought football a level of popularity that had never been seen before. But, you know, as was referenced, he did see the game in a certain way. I guess inculcated in him maybe from other managers. You know, the way the game should be played. He saw the game. John Giles would famously say he saw the game as a centre back would see the game. He never thought centre back should be doing anything flashy with the ball. You know, he had the Irish team playing a brand of football that would now be probably very much looked down upon, but at the same time we were quite successful. So he certainly will have a very interesting legacy, Big Jack, in Ireland. But I think his views on the game would have been probably formulated through that time in the way that England were playing.
I know why Sabutio was now framed the way it was. I played it when I was young because it looked like Sabutio. Watching back footage of the 1966 World Cup with that orange ball.
Well, yeah, the ball and bloody hell, the quality of the jerseys. I mean, less is more in pretty much everything in life, but I don't know what the Irish jersey looked like in '66, but looking at some of the kits, even the USSR second jersey, I forget they played a game where they had to wear their second kit. So these jerseys were literally icons, and I imagine if anyone still has one knocking around, it'd be worth a fortune, and it would look as beautiful as it did in '66.
But isn't it strange, lads, that like we see so much through the eyes of how we lived ourselves, that like, you know, Jack Charlton always probably even in '90 like almost seemed very old to us. You know, he's almost seen as like this senior figure, but it's like it's like 24 years after he won the World Cup, which is equivalent to now how, you know, you might view the England team in 1996 and that generation. Like, I mean, it wasn't as if like he was in 1990 he was this figure from another era completely. Like, you know, his World Cup win was fresh in the mind of a lot of people, and of course part of his Irish story is that he was obviously famously pretty upset that he never got the chance to manage his own country, and that was obviously a big thing. And it's maybe tied in a bit, as you say, with the life after the World Cup for the heroes of '66 maybe wasn't what many of them would have expected it to be. But that team obviously had a great personality and structure to it as well. As we mentioned, that, like, you know, that there was these staples to the team. And it's very interesting to hear John Giles speak about Norman Hunter this week, who passed away sadly and couldn't get in. And there was this sense that, you know, it was always between Bobby Moore and Hunter in a way, because it was pitched that way, that Bobby Moore was maybe a big game player, but Hunter had good distribution skills as well as, you know, he could mix it. Yeah, there was always, like, Charlton was always going to be in the team then. It was always, you know, pitched as Bobby Moore versus Hunter. So Jack was the one that was going to play. It doesn't seem to be any real debate about that.
Well, I think Ramsey saw a big... Ramsey was just a big believer in Big Jack.
Yeah, he was. He kind of came into the team quite late, and he was, I think just 30 or over at that stage. Bobby Moore, player of the tournament. Bobby Charlton, European Footballer of the Year. Alan Ball, from everything you read and everything you see, was just incredible in that final. He was only 21, and he went on to win the league with Everton and played for Arsenal. The Russian linesman, his name was Bakhramov. I still think he got it right, but we won't have that discussion today.
Did you see the story, John, about the someone posted there was 2 Irish lads over in England who were manning the scoreboard for the final as well?
No, what's this?
That was their experience for the summer. So this was a piece. Dave Kelly on the Independent sent it to me yesterday. I don't have it quite up here, but it's basically 2 Irish lads who were, again, so many people listening to this will relate to it. That, you know, they were in England trying to make a few bob or whatever, and they were manning the scoreboard in the final. So when it went 3-2, when the goal was eventually given, there was 2 lads, 2 of our own, that were marking it up. Yeah, so I'll have to get their names. I just didn't have the piece right open in front of me, but I will pull it up. We've got a bit more time to discuss it. But there was great quotes from a 2009 piece. I think it was in the Independent actually, from these guys discussing it. So there was an Irish involvement to some degree in the final.
We've got about 2 minutes left in this segment. Johnny, one thing I was thinking about this, between 1966 and 1982, when you guys were born, society did move on a lot from a modernity point of view. 1982 looks really modern compared to 1966. Yeah,
even the orange ball you mentioned. You know, I think there are going to be 16 European teams at the World Cup in 2026, which is the number of teams full stop in the world then. And the World Cup has moved on a lot. It's going to be a 48-game World Cup soon enough in our lifetime. But 66 was a long time ago. The narration, which I found quite intriguing, was that this was deemed to be one of the more tactical World Cups, and there had been a movement in the game towards stopping the opposition from scoring. So there were a lot of fairly boring games initially in the tournament. You referenced one there. I think the opening game was a bit of a bore fest, but that was one of the sort of I suppose the adjustments in the evolution of football was around that time, but definitely the thing striking me looking back on it was just cynical challenges were completely part of the game. I mean, must have seen about 20 red card challenges, which didn't, there was basically just a free kick, and that's the way it was. And the body language of the player who was on the end of it, which was frequently Pele, suggested that it was just accepted, and that's how it was. And thankfully that's out of the game. We looked in further on the evolution, because last week in 1990 we looked at that Brema challenge on Gascoigne, which was a horror tackle and would have been a straight red card because it was tackled from behind, which was brought in I think in 94, but even in 90 still that was deemed not a red card. So it's fascinating to track the evolution of the game in the form of these videos.
Brian Kerr, who was at the 1966 World Cup final won by England, will join us after 4. Back after this.
Football on Off the Ball.
With Paddy Power, the greatest football partnership since Jeff and Heskey.
Join that conversation. Text us on 53106. Texts cost 30 cents.
It's a dog's life these days, let me tell you. With this lot, at home all day, non-stop, throwing and catching and running and jumping, they have me knackered. The only break I've had so far is when they went online to the AA to save money on the car insurance. Oh, here we go, another walk. Yesterday we did 860 laps of the front garden. Marvellous.
Right now at the AA, we're offering our best ever discounts on car insurance with €100 off when you purchase online. Take out a policy and you can buy AA membership for only €60. Who's got clever car insurance? For all new quotes, please visit the AA.ie. Terms and conditions apply. Minimum premium of €280 applies. AA Ireland Limited Trading as AA Insurance is regulated by the Central Bank of Ireland.
From true crime believers to science and business achievers, sports, arts and comedy to the latest entertainment wannabe. Get political, get healthy, get educated. Get all your favourite podcasts on Go Loud. Download the Go Loud app now or add us on your smart speaker. Go Loud. Podcasts, radio and music to your ears.
The National Standards Authority of Ireland have published a series of business guidance documents to help businesses struggling to deal with the impact of COVID-19. Whether you're a small retailer or a large manufacturer, we can offer you practical steps to help you meet the public health guidelines and reduce the risk of spreading infection. For more information on our guidelines and how to contact us, visit us at nsai.ie. This is an initiative of the Government of Ireland.
Credit unions have stood at the heart of Irish communities for generations, and we are committed to supporting our members during these uncertain times. If you are facing financial difficulty due to COVID-19, at the credit union, you'll find a listening ear and a reassuring voice. Contact us today about a personalised solution, or visit the ILCU website at creditunion.ie for more information. The Credit Union. Imagine more. Credit unions in the Republic of Ireland are regulated by the Central Bank of Ireland.
Discover Dyson online at harveynorman.ie and get the latest in Dyson technology delivered straight to your home for free. Get the latest Dyson V11 Absolute Cord-Free Vacuum with up to 60 minutes of fade-free suction. Now, €549. And get a free Dyson Floor Dock worth up to €100 for a limited time only. Shop our full range of Dyson online today at harveynorman.ie and get free home delivery. Harvey Norman, your home appliance specialists.
COVID-19 is a major public health emergency here in Ireland and around the world. It's having a big impact on every aspect of our lives. We are now asked to stay at home with limited exceptions. This is especially hard for older people and those who've been advised to cocoon. Being isolated from friends and family is hard for everyone. So right now, it's important that we look out for each other and look after our neighbours. That's why national government, local government and the community and voluntary sectors have all come together to create the Community Call. To make sure that anyone who needs help can get help. And to make sure that people who would like to volunteer in their community can help where they are most needed. If you need help, if you know someone who needs help, or if you'd like to offer help, please call 0818 222 024 or call your local authority Community Call helpline. All the details are live now at gov.ie. Supported by the Government of Ireland.
At Guaranteed Irish, we believe enterprise is at the heart of thriving communities.
Like IE Domain Registry, home of .ie.
the preferred online address for business in Ireland. Did you know that 81% of Irish consumers believe that buying Irish is important? Now is the time to support Irish businesses who've moved online while we stay safe at home. Guaranteed Irish welcomes companies that are altogether better choices for our communities, so look out for it. Stay at home with .ie and continue to support Guaranteed Irish businesses. Altogether better.
During these worrying times, vulnerable, homeless people, so fragile already, are in even greater danger. DePaul needs your help to save lives now. Please make a donation and support our frontline heroes. Call DePaul on 01 453 7111 or visit depaulcharity.org. Thank you.
Across Ireland. This is the IMRO Radio Awards Station of the Year. This is News Talk.
It's 4 o'clock. Good afternoon. It's a year to the day since 29-year-old freelance journalist Lyra McKee was shot dead by a masked gunman in Derry. Media workers have been posting on social media in an online vigil to remember Lyra's life and work. Later this evening, bells will be rung across Derry City in her memory as the PSNI detectives renew their appeals for information on what happened that night in Creggan. The NUJ Irish Secretary Seamus Dooley says he hopes Lyra's enduring optimism will shine through.
Perhaps that we get a glimpse into the life of a journalist who broke down barriers, overcame distinctions and barriers. And in Derry, her saying things will not be always like this, they will get better, is on some of the graffiti. And that's a message for our time.
Health Minister Simon Harris says the Health Service is doing relatively well when it comes to getting PPE for healthcare workers. He was responding to reports that HSE supplies of masks, gowns and gloves to some nursing homes were being limited based on how many suspected and confirmed cases they had. Nursing Homes Ireland says it amounts to rationing. Minister Harris says large quantities of protective equipment are being sent, but admits more could be done.
Ireland is doing relatively well on personal protective equipment, but we can't be in any way complacent in this regard. We have more flights on the way from China. Batch 1 of a massive order has now been completed. Batch 2, which is worth €67 million, will start to be delivered from this week.
The government has ordered an urgent review of restrictions at airports after an outcry about nearly 200 fruit pickers being flown into Dublin earlier this week. The flight from Bulgaria was chartered from Ryanair to bring in workers for Keelings in North County Dublin. And finally this hour, a study by a UK alcohol awareness charity has found that 20% of UK adults say they're drinking more frequently during the lockdown. At home, Drink Aware has already offered a number of pieces of advice on their website designed to help the public control their drink consumption over the next few weeks. Ian Hamilton is a senior lecturer in addiction and mental health at the University of York. He says having too much booze isn't a great idea.
It compromises your immunity, and when we're all kind of fighting at the moment or trying to optimise our immunity against COVID, drinking isn't going to do us any favours. I think a drink every now and then is okay.
That's your news update. It's just gone 2 minutes past 4.
News Talk Weather.
Thanks to the AA. Need to renew your AA car insurance? Go to the aa.ie/myAA.
Tonight will be cloudy, mild and misty with patchy rain, drizzle and fog. However, it will be colder and mainly dry over northern Ulster with some clear spells. Lows of between 3 and 8 degrees. And now you're up to date on News Talk.
Football on Off the Ball.
With Paddy Power, the greatest football partnership since Shearer and Owen.
And here comes Hurst. He's got some people are on the pitch. They think it's all over. It is now. It's 4. And Charlton. And the players bring themselves down.
You're very welcome back to Off the Ball Saturday on News Talk. John Duggan with you through to 5 o'clock in the company of Dan McDonnell and Johnny Ward. And that was the description by Kenneth Wolstenholme of Jeff Hurst's hat-trick in the 1966 World Cup final. Our feature year today in our World Cup series with no live sport. Brian Kerr, the Irish football legend, is on the line. Brian, you were at that final. How did that come about?
Well, I was, John. I was young living in Dublin, obviously, at the time, and I had an elder brother, Frankie, who was now passed away, unfortunately. But Frankie was living and working in London at the time as so many people in Ireland had family and had siblings abroad. He had been there from when he was 15, 16. And he was working in a pub at the time. He was managing a pub called the Gunnersbury Arms, which is not too far away from Acton train station, which I've passed quite frequently in recent seasons on my way back and forward to matches. But anyway, Frankie called my parents the night the first match was played, the World Cup. The group was England and Uruguay, a 0-0 draw. And he asked my father, could I go over if he managed to get his hands on tickets for matches. My father agreed, and I was duly put on a plane in the next couple of days. And off I went to London, and I went to a lot of games. I was at that was the only game I missed in England's group, actually. The group was Mexico, France, England, and Uruguay. And I saw the rest of the games of the group. And then I stayed on. My brother, remarkably, was able to get tickets for England's quarter-final against Argentina, the semi-final against Portugal, the third-place playoff, Portugal and Russia, and the final itself against West Germany. I don't know how he did it, how he managed it, but what I do know is that the demand for tickets, even for the World Cup itself in England, wasn't anything like it would be in these modern times. I mean, he wasn't particularly interested in football himself. He was interested in boxing. But how he managed to do it, I don't know, particularly for the final. But one remarkable match I was at, John, and it is kind of strange to remember back on this. There was a match played in the White City Greyhound Stadium between France and Uruguay. And I often wondered why that was played. It was only in recent years I checked it out, and seemingly the reason was that that match was fixed for a Friday, and there was greyhound racing due in Wembley Stadium on the Saturday. And whoever owned Wembley Stadium decided that the greyhound racing had to go ahead on the Saturday. So the match was changed to the White City Greyhound Stadium. And that's how I ended up in White City. The only time in my life I was ever in White City Greyhound Stadium, although I think QPR played there after. But anyway, there I saw all those games, and I saw 5 of England's games out of the 6 games they played, including the remarkable final and the commentary that you just had there with Kenneth Wilson home, which I didn't hear till afterwards because I was at the match.
How much of a thrill was it on the day to be at the World Cup final, Brian? You're a young lad, you're a teenager, England against West Germany, and how vivid is it now? Well,
you know, it was massively exciting. I mean, at that time, we didn't see too much football on the television. You went to live games here. I was already going to international matches in Dalymount Park and watching the Irish team playing. But there weren't many home games in the season. There might be 3 or 4 maximum, I'd say. Other than that, our standard diet was of League of Ireland football, which I went to plenty of games, and the odd European match and so on, and junior football, which I went to plenty of. But so to go to the World Cup itself, I mean, I'd seen bits on the old Pate News coverage from 1962 and 58, little snippets and bits and pieces, but there was no real coverage as such, like a full games. It was the English Cup final, I think it was on the TV, maybe 61, 62, I remember that, with Spurs, Leicester, Spurs, Burnley, a couple of successive years there, then West Ham and Preston with Alan Kelly and got. So they were the earliest matches, but we only maybe 1 or 2 matches a season. The odd England away match might be on television. So if you actually go to the World Cup and having, you know, I was used to reading the history of the World Cup and the start, the origins of it, and to go and see the games and, you know, these players. We didn't know much about the continental players. I knew a lot about Portugal because Benfica were a top team at the time with so many fantastic players. But, you know, we were only reading about the other players from the Soviet Union, from Mexico, Argentina. I mean, Brazil were there. We knew about Brazil, but we didn't get to see Brazil because they got knocked out. They played up in the Northwest. And, They got knocked out by they were in the group with Portugal
and Hungary. Yeah.
Portugal, Hungary was the fourth team in the group. But anyway, they got knocked out. So we never got to see Brazil. They didn't even get through the group.
Bulgaria, I think they were.
Bulgaria is the fourth team. Yeah, four in each group, 16 teams. Top two getting through to the quarterfinal. Quarterfinal was played on a Saturday. I remember well the match with Argentina. A famous game for the sending off of the captain Ratti, and he refused to go off the pitch. And the game was held up. I remember it being very, very hot, John, and been standing on the terrace behind the goal that England were defending at the time. And at the far end, there was a scoreboard because there was another match on at the same time, Portugal and North Korea. And there was no kind of automatic scores coming up. A guy had to physically go out and put up a score when there was a goal. So you could see him walking along this kind of a platform very high up over Wembley Stadium. And we presumed he was going over early on to put the first goal for Portugal. But he proceeded on to North Korea and put up one. So it was Portugal and North Korea 1. And then he went back again and went 2. And then he went back again and went 3. So North Korea were 3 up. That was nearly more entertaining than the England match. Because the match was dull. And
Daniel McDonnell, you got the names now of those scoreboard operators who are from Ireland.
Eddie O'Keefe and Michael O'Sullivan were 2 lads from Waterford who basically, they'd left secondary school and they went to go to England in the 60s, you know, as a lot of people did. So they went to the labour exchange and they were given 2 options in the labour exchange to get some work. They offered us 2 things: working in the gardening section for the council or working in Wembley Stadium for the World Cup. There wasn't much competition and they soon graduated to the scoreboard, and that's how they ended up doing the scores for the final. I'm not sure if they were doing it on that quarter-final day that Brian mentioned. By the time the final came round, they graduated to the top job. So there we go.
Well, can you believe? Sorry, Johnny.
It's mad that Brian mentions that because, and this is a game that'll be very, very close to his heart. When I was looking back on the North Korea-Portugal game, and I was thinking, where have I seen a game before when one team was 3-0 up and lost 5-3, and straight away Shelbourne against Rangers in Prenton Park in Tranmere, and that particular game clashed with St. Pat's getting a 0-0 draw with Celtic. And I watched the Pats. Yeah, I watched that game, Brian, in Yonkers in New York. I remember I spent the summer in New York, and all I could do was try to find a place where I could watch Pats and Celtic. I just got into League of Ireland at the time. But one of the most memorable aspects of that game was the scoreboard coming through from Prenton Park. Rangers 1-0 down to Shelbourne, 2-0 down to Shelbourne, and 3-0 down to Shelbourne. And this came up on the screen, and everyone in the pub was lapping it up.
Well, what I remember, you know, from the game, I think the lad that was the Waterford lad, if it was him, he had a white coat on him like an umpire in Croke Park, maybe doing a match, right? And he had to walk across. I'd say there might have been danger money involved, and that's why they took it rather than cutting the grass in the parks. They might have been extra because they had to climb up the ladder, I think. And walk across this narrow platform, and to get out as far as North Korea was a good bit out now. Not North Korea, the place, just the edge of just the edge of where North Korea
North Korea was always hard to get to.
It was hard to get into and hard to get out of. Anyway, by the time he got to 3, anyway, there was a lot of oohs and ahs in the crowd because the English game was quite dull, right? And then I think if memory serves me right, not too long after it was 3-0, Portugal got going. Eusebio started doing the stuff, and Torres and Coluna and Simões, the little fella Simões, a very good player. Gusto, they'd really good team, Portugal. Anyway, the goals started coming. I think maybe by half time it was 3-2, and ultimately, as she said, it was 5-3, and Eusebio got 4 goals. So I was looking forward to seeing that semi-final game, which was a great game. The game England-Portugal in the semi-final, and Bobby Charlton got the 2 goals. But Eusebio, the brilliance of Eusebio, I mean, Mozambique, Pearl, he was just, he was such an athlete. There was such style and power about him. And funny enough, I actually sat beside him one day at an international match in Dublin when we played Portugal a good few years back. And if ever I was in awe of someone, I rarely asked someone for his autograph, but I did that day. But I couldn't explain to him that I'd seen him in 1966. I kind of wanted to, but that was a brilliant game, and that was at the third place playoff with Russia, and I think it came down to a late penalty. It was 1-1, and it was Eusebio against the legendary Lev Yashin in goal for Russia, and I was in line with the penalty spot where Eusebio was going to take the penalty, and I kind of, Yashin was a hero of mine. We were kind of, he was one of those guys we knew. He wore all black. As a goalkeeper, he was all black with just the number 1 on his back, right? But anyway, Eusebio buried the penalty, and I think I remember Eusebio going up and shaking hands with him after he scored the penalty, and then picked up the ball and ran back to the halfway line with it. And so they won the third place playoff, 2-1 win. That would have been probably on the Friday night, and then the final was on Sunday. So the final was on Saturday. So I was back and forward to Wembley a few times that week. Sometimes I was brought by people, friends of my brothers, but I kind of remember being at the matches on my own, and surviving without any bother. So you imagine a kid of 13 days' time going to matches to World Cup final on his own. There you are.
Yeah, 53106. Dogs on the Monday, Wednesday, Friday was a bigger earner than football for the owners. Great night out in London. Great programme, lads. That is from Seamus in Killarney. Brian Kerr spent many days in Harold's Cross Greyhound Stadium when he was manager of St Pat's. That is from Martin. This is just gas. We got a text in here. My husband, Eddie O'Keefe, and his friend Michael O'Sullivan from Waterford were scoreboard keepers in 1966 in Wembley for the World Cup. That's from Colette O'Keefe in Waterford. Colette, fair play to you for texting
Colette,
in.
get the man on the show.
Brian, what was that final like?
Well, look, I think most people are interested in football. I've seen it in some of the guises now. It's been dickied up in full colour and all now. It was a remarkable match to be at. I remember things like every German person in the ground seemed to have a yellow, red and black flag, small flags, and I can see them waving English flags. I can't really remember so much of that, but there was a lot of various flags and banners around the place. But remarkable atmosphere. Again, very warm day. I remember I was sitting not too far from the Queen actually as that happened. I was up. I helped my brother pull that one out, but I had a £3.10 ticket that was up not too far from the Royal Box, right? So I had a very, very good view of the match. I mean, the change in fortunes, the turn, the scoreline, the match 2-1, England looking like they're going to win it, and late goals for Germany to get it back, goes to extra time. Horst gets the 3 goals. I remember being disappointed Greaves wasn't playing because he was one of my heroes, Jimmy Greaves. He played in a couple of the group games, but he got injured, I think, in the last group match against France, and then he didn't play in the quarter-final and semi-final. And Alf Ramsey stuck with, Horst, Peters, Hunt, the midfield, with Ball and Charlton, Styles in the middle of the pitch. So Graves didn't get a game in the final, which was, given the outstanding player he was, an outstanding goal scorer of that era for a long, long period, right through the 60s and into the 70s. He was a fabulous player. But I remember being personally disappointed that Graves didn't play. But, Horst's performance on day and the goals and the controversy of the ball and the goal coming down off the crossbar, is a goal, is it not? I'm waiting to see. It was just unbelievable. I was probably too young to appreciate how astonishing it was to be at a World Cup final as a kid, and to understand the tactical side of the game, because it was a new game, a new style in terms of England, the work rate and 4 midfield players, no wingers. He played Terry Payne in one of the matches. He played Ian Callaghan in one of the matches. But as he got to the quarter-final, semi-final, the final, didn't play wingers at all. They were all midfield players playing the wide position. And then, Wilson and Cohn as the full-backs, Charlton and Moore, the elegance of Moore. But Jeremy had brilliant players as well. Young Beckenbauer, Snellinger, one of the full-backs. I remember Zuvi Seeler, centre-forward, a baldy fella. Ziggy held up front with him. Seeler actually was one of those that played in the League of Ireland. That question, name the World Cup winners who played in the League of Ireland, and people always forget Uwe Saylor played, I think, a match for Cork Celtic when he had some relationship with Cork.
That is gas, that story. I never knew that.
Well, there you are. There's one for. I think he wasn't young. Like he wouldn't have got in. He would have been. He would have been a banger for under 35 football now. You know, I think he was in the 40s when he played for Cork Celtic. But Uwe Saylor, and then they came and won it the next time round. But Saylor, I thought, was a great player. Haller got the first goal. I think he was second highest scorer after Eusebio at that World Cup. But it was just sensational to think back. And I haven't been at a final since, I have to say. You've been at a final since, John, one or two, have you?
One, and Daniel's been at, I think, three.
3, yeah.
Did you keep any memorabilia, Brian?
I did. I mean, somewhere stashed in the attic, and I'm not bad at holding stuff. But one thing that sticks in my mind was coming out of the last group match England played was Mexico, and I remember leaving the game. It must have been after the second game England played Mexico. England beat Mexico 2-0, but I think it meant that Mexico were gone because they drew the first match with France 1-1. But on the way out of the game, in the car park, a Mexican fan gave me his hat, his sombrero, and what he had on it was, the old, the kind of badges he used to get, up England to be on it, or up Spain, or those kind of flowery sort of cresty sort of a thing. You pin them on horses. What do you call them when they win?
Rosettes, is it?
Rosettes.
Yeah, rosette sort of a yoke. Yeah.
The Tories wear them, Brian. The Tories wear them.
Who wears them?
We'll get the Tories next week.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Okay, so the rosettes. A man had a load of them pinned to the sombrero. They were of the competing teams, and he must have been leaving. It must have been the end of his trip to England, and he saw me walking through the car park, and he came over to me and he presented it to me, right? So I used to wear it going to the matches with all the different teams. And when you think of it now, like you can't go to a match and wear the opposition's colours and stuff. I didn't care at the time. But I had that stashed away somewhere in the programme, and some pins and bits and pieces. Yeah, I have them. I have some of that stuff still stashed around. I think I have some tickets as well. I think I have the stub of the £3, 10 shillings ticket as well.
Radio Go, lads. What a great show that is from Jason in Walkinstown. Nice one, Jason. Brian, how different was life back then?
How different was life? It's a good while ago. Well, life was all about, competing. For me, and most of the kids of my age, it was about going to sport, not so much watching sport on the television, because it was much more scarce. I mean, there would have been a bit of horse jumping on the telly on the BBC midweek from the White City indoor arena, and we'd have been watching, Seamus Hayes and Good Boy winning things, and Tommy Wade and Dundrum horses winning things. That'd be on at the odd night, and there'd be cricket on the telly. But there wasn't an awful lot of sport on the telly or football. So I think, like most kids, you were out doing things most of the day. You were out playing sport, playing football, playing whatever, playing hurling, or going to sport. I mean, I went to sports, all sorts of sports. I tell people this, they kind of think I'm a bit mad. Like I once went to a water polo international competition for the weekend out in Blackrock. Outdoor bats. Went to see Wales. I think it was Wales, Scotland, England and Ireland. But I would have gone to anything. I would have went to boxing. I would have been going to Crow Park, watching hurling, football, watching anything. League of Ireland, all sorts of stuff. I think it was motor racing up in the Phoenix Park. So that's what life is like for us, was finding a few, getting the money to get into things and finding your way to it, getting buses, travelling to events, going to school. It was fairly simple, but the competitive levels of the sport where I lived in Drimnagh was very, very high, because there were so many playing and so much activity. There was no lifts to school or lifts to training or getting it. What you had to go. Your parents kind of showed you the way and let you off, and you had to do it. But I know I used to save my bus fare that I got to go to school. I used to save it. I used to run to school instead and save the money for whatever I wanted. That might involve saving money to go in to see Pats playing or go to an international match or whatever. But that and I don't think I was that unusual. I think most kids were like that the same. They appreciated getting to games, live sport, and learning about the sports by watching fellas playing rather than getting it explained to you on the telly by people, by pundits and fellas like that. He says, as a pundit.
Lads, you want to come in there?
I'd be interested, Brian, to maybe you're not necessarily the right person to ask this because first of all you were mad in sport and second of all you lived in Dublin, but what was the sporting landscape like in Ireland at that time? Because Micheál Murphy was on Nathan's dad and he was saying from his perspective there wasn't that much interest in soccer as it would have been known. From a personal perspective it would have been around the time Galway won the 3 in a row in Gaelic football. And what was the place that soccer or football, as we would call it, had in the national discourse at that time? And did 66 change it?
Well, I think in Dublin soccer was very prominent and always very prominent. Probably less so in many of the provincial towns until the 66 World Cup, and then of course in Ireland particularly the Charlton years and the emergence of soccer and soccer clubs in every town and village in the country after that. But at that time, certainly in Dublin, soccer was prominent. But because the educational structures were dominated by the clergy and particularly the Christian Brothers, who were generally rural people, there was a lot of emphasis on Gaelic games in school. I mean, I played from the time I went to primary school. I played Gaelic, I played hurling football, kind of almost every day there was hurling football in school and training for the teams and going to watch the teams. I mean, we were strong in St Michael's and Inchicore. We were in the finals every year. It seemed to be as the seniors, as the juniors, as they were called, under 12 or 14s would be in the finals, and there was great rivalries with other schools around Dublin. But we would have, like I would have went to the Railway Cup finals. Religiously is a strange word to use now these days, but I would have went to the Railway Cup finals every year, I'd say, from the time I was about 7. I would have seen, Mick Mackey and Christy Ring and those fellas playing at that time. And, they were legendary fellas. You knew you were going to see something special, even if Leinster weren't playing. I remember some of the times we went, Leinster wouldn't be playing. Other times they would be playing. I was there the day that Leinster played in the 2 finals, and I think that Des Foley played in both matches. He played in the hurling, then he played in the football final for Leinster. Can you imagine that? You play the 2 matches one after the other, and you play in both of them. Like, you're not come on as a sub. You start in both matches. But there was lots going on. But there was, I mean, in my head, soccer was the main thing. I was kind of surrounded by where I lived, by people who kind of loved the game, and we could go and watch high-level games. Like I say, we go to Dagenham, you could go to Talca Park easy enough, you could go to Milltown, but of course for me it was the Holy Grail, was Inchicore, and I could actually walk to it, and I could run out of school and get down to the ground, which we did for cup replays. I remember midweek, just waiting for the moment for the bell to go, that we could run out and get down to the ground. It was only, I'd say, 100 yards from the gate in the school to the Styles where St Pat's played. But, we were very aware of the strength of Gaelic game. And boxing, I think at that time, boxing was strong at that time. Athletics as well, because of Ronnie Delaney's successes. I would have went to the Morton Stadium on a regular basis, Santry as it was called then, to see athletics events with Eamon Cochran was my mate, and we used to go with his dad, and we go to Santry Stadium to see, there would be big international events there in the summer, and you'd be seeing people who had ran in the Olympics or were medal winners at the Olympic Games in maybe 1960, and they'd be running in Santry Stadium. So that was life was about getting through school and waiting on the next big sporting event that you could go to, like whether it was Friday, Saturday, Sunday. But even midweek, particularly in the brighter nights and brighter summer days, you would go to events in midweek.
53106. Ireland played West Germany shortly before the 1966 World Cup in Delhi-Mount. Ireland lost 4-0 by Uncle Bobby Gilbert, won his only cap in that game. Well done, Brian. This is Brian Kerr, who's been very generous to come on the show and tell us his memories of the 1966 World Cup. It's our feature year today. He was at the final when England beat West Germany 4-2. Well done, Brian, for saying an overage player is a banger. That's from the Walkinstown Beckenbauer. Dan, you want to come in on anything there?
Oh, listen, I don't know where to come in. I'm just happy to listen to a lot of this. I'm actually curious, Brian. I know it was well before your time managing St. Pat's. I'm trying to think if you were 13 and 66, 1977, what sort of 24, 25. Gordon Banks played that one game for Pat's against Shamrock Rovers. I don't know if you were there or have any sort of recollection of, that
I wasn't there, Daniel. At the time, I was managing somebody else at the time. Not sure what team. It was probably Shell's B team. And I missed that game, but I've read about it, and I remember at the time being fascinated by it because, again, Gordon Banks was such a hero. Anyone who was interested in football. I mean, he was such a nice guy. He had a legendary career. He was so loyal to Stoke. He played for Stoke, and he never went to one of the kind of teams that were always winning. Let's say there was no traditional top six as them, but he didn't go. And, he had lost the eye in a car accident. He played a bit in America. And then he played a match for Pats. Rovers. Pats won 1-0, I think.
Pats and Rovers anyway, yeah. I think he was 40 at the time.
He made a legendary save from Eamon Dunphy shot to out of the top corner. He hadn't played too much, I think, before it. But it was only one game. Pat had a kind of a history of that sort of getting in players, either English or Scottish players were well known. Barry Bridges was the manager for a few years and he used to bring in players. Remember, he's a Scotch fella, George Luke, and then another manager, John Coleraine, Scottish manager. He played for Celtic and he managed player manager of Glentoran when they did very well in the European Cup, got to the quarter-final. And he came to Pats as well. So they were off, and they used to have a bit of money from the bingo at that point. They ran the bingo in several venues around the general area of Inchicore, which I think was quite successful. So they were able to afford to bring in some exotic players, I would have said nearly at that time, exotic in terms of their history. So, I did miss that one, unfortunately. But, that kind of happened, Daniel, as I got more involved in coaching and managing. I wasn't going as much to see them because I was at Shells, like, two spells at Shells. I was playing at Shells, 17, 18, a year in the B team, and then I managed their B team twice. I managed Rovers youth team when I was 20 actually. I managed Rovers youth team. So I would have been busy with the teams I was managing. I was trying to play a bit as well, not very well, but I was trying to play. So I'd missed a good bit of League of Ireland stuff as I got older because I was directly involved in Sundays and matches. The Friday night stuff suited me better.
53106 for your text messages. God, Brian is a tonic. Would love to share a pint with him sometime. That is from Deck in Cork. Brian Kerr.
We'd all love to share a pint there with me.
We would. Yeah. Brian, don't remind me. I'm kind of ahead of my hands here now, to be honest, at this stage. But you're an absolute gent, Brian. From water polo to Mexican sombreros to England beating West Germany in 1966. You're great to share your memories with Dan and with Johnny and myself today.
Thank you, John. No problem, no bother.
That is the Irish football legend, Brian Kerr, the national treasure. 53106. This is Off the Ball Saturday on News Talk.
Football on Off the Ball
with Paddy Power, the greatest football partnership since Shearer and Owen.
Tech Talk with Jess Kelly.
On the latest Tech Talk, we have an exclusive interview with the country director of Huawei in Ireland. We discuss President Trump moving away from Google and the future of the brand. Plus, Peter Coppinger of Teamwork discusses the impact of COVID-19 on their business.
Tech Talk with Jess Kelly.
Listen and subscribe to the podcast now or tune in this evening at 5.
On News Talk.
At Guaranteed Irish, we believe enterprise is at the heart of thriving communities.
Like IE Domain Registry, home of .ie. the preferred online address for business in Ireland. Did you know that 81% of Irish consumers believe that buying Irish is important? Now is the time to support Irish businesses who've moved online while we stay safe at home. Guaranteed Irish welcomes companies that are altogether better choices for our communities, so look out for it. Stay at home with .ie and continue to support Guaranteed Irish businesses. Altogether better.
At Bank of Ireland, we want our customers and colleagues to stay safe and well. Now more than ever, it's important to know that your financial well-being is our priority. We have a range of supports available for our personal and business customers with easy online applications. Our dedicated staff are working to support you. But if you're cocooning or self-isolating at home, you can now nominate a family member or trusted friend to do your banking for you. We're also giving a €1 million emergency fund to support our communities right now. To find out more, visit bankofireland.com. Take care. Bank of Ireland. Bank of Ireland is regulated by the Central Bank of Ireland.
Some of us have gone from 5K back to the couch. Keeping active will help you feel well. For ideas on getting active from the comfort of your living room, go to gov.ie/together, an initiative of the Government of Ireland.
Big things happen when you're being supported. At FBD Insurance, we get that. Our Car Protect sale is now on at fbd.ie. FBD Insurance. Support. It's what we do. Acceptance criteria, terms and conditions apply. Underwritten by FBD Insurance plc. FBD Insurance Group Limited, trading as FBD Insurance, is regulated by the Central Bank of Ireland.
The COVID-19 crisis in our nursing homes has raised profound questions. In this week's Sunday Independent, we seek answers from the boss of HICWA and Health Minister Simon Harris. And with civil war politics over, our writers named the ministers they'd like to see running the country. Plus the continuing curse of the Kennedys, Life magazine writers on what's keeping them awake at night, and Catherine Thomas on the return of Operation Transformation. The Sunday Independent. Real stories worth paying for in print or subscribe at independent.ie.
At Harvey Norman, we're here to help. Our online store is open and we can deliver the products you need to your home. So if you're looking for technology to help you stay connected to work, school, family and friends, a home office desk, a spare bed, or you need to replace a washing machine or fridge, then visit us at harveynorman.ie. And right now, get free delivery on all orders of furniture, beds or mattresses over €50. Harvey Norman, your appliances, technology, furniture and bedding specialists.
Go! We have great value this week at your local Super Value. Like Super Value Fresh Unsmoked Back Bacon Joint, 700 gram, €3. And Super Value 7 fruit and veg offers like round cabbage, 49 cents. For cooking inspiration, check out supervalue.ie and our social media channels. Rest assured, at Super Value, we're there for you.
The Lotto jackpot is an estimated €9.8 million. If you'd like to play any of your favourite National Lottery games from home, just download the app or visit lottery.ie. Play responsibly, play for fun.
Football on Off the Ball.
With Paddy Power, the greatest football partnership since Jeff and Heskey.
And you're very welcome back to Off the Ball Saturday on News Talk. John Duggan with you through to 5 o'clock in the company of Daniel McDonnell from the Irish Independent, Johnny Ward, the broadcaster and journalist. Our football coverage brought to you with thanks to Paddy Power. For more information on responsible gambling, visit dunlewy.net. Over the last hour and a half, we've been reminiscing on our World Cup year of focus, 1966, when England won in England. And Brian Kerr was on for the last half hour. You can check out our podcasts every week on the Off the Ball network. So go to offtheball.com, the highlights section, and then you will see our podcasts if you want to listen to Brian Kerr and Daniel McDonnell and Johnny Ward on our World Cup year today, or Mario Rosenstock. We also spoke to Mario, the comedian, the impressionist, about his love of sport earlier on in the show today. Lads, I'm still kind of reeling from how brilliant Brian Kerr is at telling stories, and what a national treasure. How are we going to follow that, lads?
I don't know. Johnny, over to you, Johnny.
Yeah, I think that's a bit like David Moyes taking over from Fergie or whatever at Man United. You're basically on the way. You're on the way down. But Brian, it's just we spoke about what might have happened in Irish football had they qualified in '66. But Brian's absence from the game, since he more or less fell out with the FAI, is absolutely galling. Just listen to that horrible state of affairs that a man of his passion and brilliance really wasn't involved in Irish football, but you can just tell that the passion just is in his body 24/7, and just great to listen. And I'm just amazed that he must be absolutely indebted to his late brother to be able to bring him over. I can't imagine it was that cheap to fly to anywhere from Ireland.
Might have been the boat.
Yeah, I think he said he flew, and
did he?
Did he in '66, and then to be in a seat that was near the Queen, you know, incredible stuff, and just that was fantastic listening to him, I have to say.
Yeah, it's. I mean, my dad was talking about the third, fourth place playoff game. He said the cost of a ticket was the equivalent of like 75 pence in sort of you know, in punt terms, you know. So it obviously wasn't it's not the World Cup now, to try and get close to the equivalent of the Royal Box at a final. You're talking sort of I don't know. But John, I think you spoke about 2014 and maybe some of the prices you might have been quoted by touts on your adventure with Johnny Lyons.
We were willing to pay $5,000 each.
Yeah. So a very
is that foolish?
Much more accessible event.
Foolish and ethically questionable, I would argue.
I was willing. Well, look, everybody to their own. I was willing to spend it. Yeah.
Yeah, there's another story though. I mean, it's funny that Brian mentioned about just queuing for autographs, and before we maybe, I don't know if we move on for it or not, but if people are interested, and there's like great recommended reading out of this. There's a guy in The Guardian called Simon Burnton who wrote a great piece. I don't know when he did it, around 2016, probably, you know, 40 years on or 50 years on, from that World Cup. Speaking about this 9-year-old and 12-year-old outside the dressing room at Hillsborough, hoping to get some autographs when Uruguay played West Germany. And Uruguay had lost 4-0, had a couple of players sent off, but they were very pleasantly surprised when a couple of Uruguayan players stopped and didn't just give their autograph, but wrote what they thought were messages of kindness. So it was a couple of days later before they got the Spanish translation of these messages. And the Spanish translation was saying, the referee is a thief. German criminals stole the game from Uruguay. So it was a much more innocent time, but maybe like the autograph books maybe had a different story. But I just love it. Like you can't really imagine Brian Kerr though being 12, 13 queuing for an autograph, you know, from someone. You view him as a much more authoritative senior figure in every sense, rather than being spellbound by the game. But that's where it starts for everyone, I guess.
53106. What a wonderful piece of radio. Could listen to Brian all day. Was fortunate to know the late Louis Kilcoyne when he lived in Arklow, and he was fabulous to talk to. Also, legends, that is from Leo Thurkilson. Sorry, Leo, if I haven't got your name right. From Arklow, and he's a rugby player. Brian Kerr, great storyteller. He's hilarious, and that is from Colum. Great show. Des Foley and 62 Railway Cups. That is from Jerry. Great listening to the memories from Brian. That is from EC. Lads, there's a really kind of good thing that I want you to think about for next week when we talk about football. There's this, I mean, you might have done it already, but my nephew George sent this to me, to pick your world 11 with no two players from the same country, so you can't pick Messi and Maradona. No two kind of played for the same club, so you can't have Maradona and Suarez from Uruguay because they both play for Barcelona. And all 11 have to have played in your lifetime. So maybe worth thinking about for next week. I've seen it all over the internet and so many different combinations and replies.
Well, if you get Brian back on there, Brian Kerr will already have that answered for you. Just get him back on the blower. He'll have his answer straight away.
Jamie Carragher would be much more on top of it. I should say in response to that text before we get any complaints, I think Louis Kilcoyne would be a much more divisive figure in the history of Irish football, particularly if you're a Shamrock Rovers fan. So we should make that point.
I should also counter, JD, just lest you think I'm on any moral high ground about paying over the odds for tickets. You know, depending on the teams, if I were stuck and we're an All-Ireland final or Galway United were in an FAI Cup final or something like that, you wouldn't know what lengths you'd go to.
Well, that was my ultimate, and lucky enough to go very much. I'll take it to the grave in Moscow 4 years later. Shamrock Rovers, lads, we see the pay cut, the 25% this week, and there's a lot of talk, obviously, with this very unprecedented and worrying time with the coronavirus pandemic about the GA maybe playing matches behind closed doors. Is it the talk in Irish football circles that Shamrock Rovers or League of Ireland clubs will be playing behind closed doors?
Well, it's still deemed unlikely and something that probably wouldn't really suit football here that much. I mean, it does seem like there's an intent in England to get the season finished by whatever means possible, and it seems quite likely that when that does happen, it will be behind closed doors initially. I think it's going to be a lot more complicated to do that here for a variety of reasons. I mean, you don't have a lucrative TV deal to prop it up, and as a result, the English clubs want to play behind closed doors to almost, in some respects, to fulfill some of these broadcast deals, whereas here clubs don't get money from it, and even if they did charge money for streams or whatever it might be, it's quite likely that if Ireland gets to go ahead to play, then England will also be going ahead at that point, and they're talking about playing, games and games, across successive days. So the audience for it will be squeezed. So from my understanding on it, from people who are very much involved, that it would be a sort of a last resort territory. It's not something that they want to do from sort of an economic perspective. But we are obviously at a situation where, there may come a point where just to get it back, they might need to trial it to some degree. But it's completely different to other countries who have TV deals to make it pay. Here, it's just not going to work. And yeah, I mean, Rovers have obviously, the players have had to take a pay cut, and there's cutbacks at other clubs. A lot of them are availing of the wage subsidy scheme, which I think is actually given them a lot of protection, to be honest. And football here probably hasn't fared that badly thus far, but obviously there's a big debate over whether that wage subsidy scheme will sort of be prolonged beyond June, and that is really becoming the key cutoff point for football here, that they can almost survive as they are now in a strange way for another couple of months with that protection. But if you get to the stage where it doesn't look like it's going to start, and you wonder where the whole season stands and where contracts stand, then there's no doubt it's got the potential to get very complicated, and even playing behind closed doors may not make sense to offset the financial fears.
What I love about this time, folks, in a way, is that it gives you a lot of time to think about, like Arthur Hopcraft there, for example, Dan. I got that book in during the week, and Johnny, and I got about 10 soccer books through Amazon, and there's been this great debate that Nathan Murphy's having every Thursday about John Giles picking his best 11 of all time with various clubs, Manchester United, Liverpool, Tottenham. I agreed of 7 of them. And John Giles, during the week, he picked his all-time Arsenal team with Nathan, with Liam Brady and Absolute Chewin to be selected. And these debates are great, guys. I was going through the team there, and I'll just go through the team that he picked. David Seaman, Peter Storey, David O'Leary, Tony Adams, Bob McNabb, Patrick Vieira, Cesc Fabregas, Liam Brady, Ian Wright, Thierry Henry and Dennis Bergkamp. These are always very hard to get right because it's all about opinions.
Yeah, and these are hard to get right and impossible to actually come up with the right answer. It's a bit like, whatever your version of history is, whatever my version of history is, it's wrong. And with teams that are based over many, many years, with the evolution of football and all that, Gilesy is going to be wrong on this, but I actually thought he picked a really good team. And the forward players, I couldn't really argue with him, but I'm sure this wasn't lost on a lot of people. He picked 2 Irish players in that team. And it's interesting, we referenced the fact that Gilesy and the lads didn't qualify in '66, and Big Jack would come on to be our manager. Gilesy picked, David O'Leary and Liam Brady, and it'd be fair to say Big Jack didn't exactly have the same view on those two.
Dan, you've any view on that Arsenal team you've just heard?
Yeah. I must listen to that one because I really enjoyed the Spurs one the week before, and I don't know about you, John, but I'm still recovering from the shock that he didn't put Modric in his team.
I didn't put him in mine either.
Well, I'm recovering from the shock that you didn't as well then, in that case. But I mean, obviously the competition is pretty hot, and I know we spoke about Danny Blanchflower and I'm trying to think who else did he have? He probably would have had Hoddle, and I'm trying to think who the other player he had.
He didn't have Gascoigne in. I had Gascoigne in there straight away.
Yeah. Now, to me, Modric would have to be in it, but that's just personal preference. And as I said, with these things, there's no right or wrong answer really, just opinions. And I mean, just from the Arsenal one, he's actually a bit more contemporary with that one than he was maybe with the Spurs selections, where in a couple of marginal decisions he more so went for the older player, whereas I mean that's a very heavily, that's a Wenger Arsenal selection, particularly in the forward areas.
Well, it's even like Peter Storey and Bob McNabb. I'm not so up in these players, and then you kind of, what was this player like? I'm interested in their career. 53106. Nobby Stiles played my uncle's testimonial back in the 70s, the late 70s. I was a ball boy of the match, but I felt I was in the presence of a World Cup legend, that is St Paul O'Neill in Waterford. And even watching back the footage of Nobby Stiles, who's not that well at the moment, he was a real scrapper, and he kind of put Eusebio in his pocket in the semi-final. And that's what you need in a team. You need a player like that will be tenacious and get at other players.
You mentioned that, John, that he's not that well, and it is sad. I just got a text in from a friend there. He said, I much more enjoy football nostalgia than modern football, which I think actually a lot of people would agree with. But there was beautiful footage. I think it was at the start of the video where they showed like I think it was a collection of England players basically defending some sort of a set piece situation, and the expression, and I think a goal may have come from
that was the final. That was in the final.
That was the equaliser. It was the equaliser.
Yeah. That was the equaliser. So you have an image of Nobby Stiles and Bobby Charlton basically just and I don't know if you've watched the Zidane movie where basically the whole film is just on Zidane for the 90 minutes of the game, but watching that free kick in the eyes of the wall was just great TV, and to think that it was 1966 was really inventive TV.
That's fascinating because I watched Messi for the whole of the Iceland game in the 2018 World Cup, and it's just amazing to watch one player, because who else would I be watching? But I just kept my eyes on him like a player can for the whole game.
But on that, JD, like it's if you were an aspiring young player, go forget about watching games on TV if you can, and do what Brian did. Go along to a game, and if you want to be a good midfielder, if you want to be a good left back, watch that player. And so much of the game is going to be when that player isn't on the ball, but everything that he's doing when he's not on the ball is so significant. And if you do that, it'll definitely help your education as a footballer.
It spoke a lot to me about what pressure is watching Messi that day against Iceland. It was the first game of the World Cup. Iceland equalised. I think Aguero put Argentina in front, and Messi missed a penalty. And the pressure, what it does to somebody, even as talented and as world-class as Lionel Messi, it's still only a 90-minute match. It's still only within the white lines. And the pressure got to him a little bit that day with the penalty miss. And he could just see, even after the game, he didn't want to speak to anybody, didn't want to talk to anybody. He was walking around in his own torment with the weight of a whole nation on his shoulders. And the only reason I really kind of was perceptive about that was because I watched him alone. And yeah, what you're saying, Johnny, is very interesting there.
Well, on that, JD, as well, he's played, what you're saying is basically defines Messi's Argentinian story from my perspective of what I've seen. Whereas when he's playing for Barcelona, he's playing for the love of the game. When he's playing for Argentina, he basically feels like he has to win the war for Argentina, and he's been completely inhibited and completely embraced what you're saying there. He's never looked the same player because he's had the weight of Argentina on his shoulders.
Dan, did you kind of feel that when you've seen Messi?
But a bit. But I mean, I do think sometimes the perception of Messi's Argentina career is warped because he hasn't had the ultimate glory, but he still lifted them through loads of games and qualified them for tournaments. That actually, he's actually had a pretty decent international career. It's just that he's never got that crowning moment to cap it off, and he has dragged them through a lot of games at various times. And yeah, like I mean, it is striking to go back to the 66 thing that like there was this thing about Pele, of course, and the eyes of the world on Pele at 25, and even like his torment in that tournament is a story. And that is the thing with Messi, that I guess whatever about the arguments of the merits of the winning or losing, you wonder has he enjoyed his Argentina career? I guess that would be the question, because even when he has had good tournaments, it's viewed as a failure because it doesn't end with the glorious success of his Barcelona one. And yeah, I didn't see as much. I'm not even sure. I saw Argentina once in 2018. That was the game against France, which was an insane game and an amazing game to be at. But saw more of them in 2014, John, and a bit like that, where you're sort of, if he's not doing something in the game, you're wondering. But then, like in the 90th minute against Iran, he does something. Like it's an obscene amount of pressure for someone to live with. But I mean, that's the price of greatness, I guess.
Yeah, 53106. Bob Wilson would be my Arsenal goalkeeper. That is from Paul in Sligo. Lads, we got to wrap it there. I'm going to try and maybe get a more modern year for the World Cup next year. I think it's
2022.
We've a few to go through. I don't know. I'll leave it. But John, you've picked every week, so I'm not going to try and influence you. I think we should do 2002 at some stage, but I'm open to your judgment on where we go with it.
Well, we'll be doing 2002 in two parts. Saipan for the first part, and the second part will be the actual World Cup.
Non-Saipan 02 could be actually more interesting,
Yeah. Lads, it's been great. Dan McDonnell and Johnny Ward, thanks so much.
Thanks, JD. Thanks to BK.
Yeah, Brian Kerr as well. So remember, folks, you can check out the Off the Ball podcast network, offtheball.com, for the highlights of our chats today, World Cup 1966, and also the chat with Mario Rosenstock, who also appeared on the show earlier on as well. Don't forget our show tomorrow. Joe Malloy in the chair from 1 o'clock will be joined by the former Republic of Ireland and Liverpool star Ronnie Whelan for a look back upon his career. There's the paper review with Sarah O'Donovan and Bernard Jackman, and we'll hear from the former world number 1 Lee Westwood on Golf Weekly. Really looking forward to listening to that. Lee Westwood, a Ryder Cup star. Then between 5 and 6, our rugby chat with Neil Tracy, speaking to the former Munster hooker Duncan Casey. Remember to check out that podcast network on offtheball.com. Also, really those interesting debates with John Giles' best 11 of all time. Liverpool, Manchester United, Arsenal, Tottenham, they're all on offtheball.com. So go to our podcast network, check out the GoLad app, and please stay safe. And thanks for listening this afternoon. Bye-bye.